My neighbor spent months trying to make my life miserable. He knocked over my garbage cans every week, he flipped me off every time he drove past my house, and he even tried to get my 10-year-old son arrested over something completely ridiculous. For months, I stayed calm, I stayed polite, I stayed on the high road. But one day, while standing in a hardware store aisle, I realized something. I could destroy the one thing he loved most without him ever proving it was me. And 3 days later, his prized rose garden looked like it had been attacked by a biblical plague. Before we get into the story, if you enjoy revenge stories where karma hits exactly the right person, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And stick around, because this one ends with one of the most quietly brilliant acts of revenge I've ever heard. All right, let's get into it. This whole situation started over something incredibly stupid. A dog. My neighbor lived 2 houses down from me. We weren't friends, but we weren't enemies either. At least, not at first. Just 2 suburban families living on the same quiet street. Kids riding bikes, people mowing their lawns, dogs barking in the distance. Normal neighborhood stuff. But one afternoon, everything changed. I was in my backyard playing with my dog. He was a big, energetic dog, but normally very well behaved. Suddenly, out of nowhere, another dog came running into my yard. No leash, no owner, just sprinting straight across the grass like it owned the place. It was my neighbor's dog. Before I even had time to react, the 2 dogs collided, growling, barking, teeth flashing. It happened fast. Dogs don't care about property lines. They care about territory. And my dog saw an unfamiliar animal charging into his yard. Instinct took over. They started fighting. I sprinted across the yard yelling, "Hey, hey, stop!" Adrenaline kicked in. My heart was pounding in my ears. Luckily, I managed to grab my dog's collar and pull him back before things got seriously ugly.
But the neighbor's dog had a couple of bite wounds. Nothing life-threatening, but definitely enough to require a vet visit. A few hours later, my neighbor showed up at my door. He didn't knock politely, he pounded on it. When I opened the door, he looked furious. His face was red, his jaw clenched. "Your dog attacked mine," he snapped. I explained exactly what happened. Your dog came into my yard, off-leash, unsupervised. But he didn't want an explanation. He wanted money. The vet bill was a few $100s, and he demanded that I pay all of it. Now, legally, I didn't owe him anything. His dog entered my property, but I wasn't trying to start a war with the guy. So I offered a compromise. "Look," I said calmly, "I'll pay half, just to keep things fair." Most reasonable people would accept that. Not this guy. Instead, he leaned forward and said something that would start the entire feud. "If you don't pay the whole thing, I'm taking you to court." I blinked. "Seriously?" He nodded. So I shrugged and said, "All right, see you in court." The small claims hearing lasted maybe 3 minutes. The judge looked at the case, looked at the photos, looked at the statements, and immediately ruled in my favor. Dog entered my yard, owner responsible, case dismissed. Just like that. You would think that would be the end of it, but for my neighbor, losing that case seemed to flip some kind of switch, because after that day, he started making my life miserable. Not in big, dramatic ways, in petty ways, the kind that slowly grind on your nerves. Every trash day, my garbage cans would mysteriously get knocked over. Every single week. Trash scattered across the driveway, coffee grounds, food wrappers, broken bottles. Sometimes I hear a car horn outside, and when I looked out the window, there he was, driving past my house, honking, flipping me off, like a grown man stuck in middle school. But the moment that really crossed the line was when he tried to involve my kid. My 10-year-old son sometimes rode a mini bike in the neighborhood. One of our neighbors owned it and let several of the kids ride it around occasionally. No one had a problem with it, except him. One afternoon, I got a knock at the door, and there he was again, standing there with his arms crossed. "This kid is riding a stolen vehicle," he said, pointing at my son. I stared at him. "What?" "I'm calling the police." He was dead serious. He never called the cops on any other kids, just mine. because he knew it would get under my skin. And it worked. Not because I was afraid, but because I was tired. Tired of the constant harassment. Tired of the stupid games. Tired of wondering what he might try next. Eventually, my family and I had enough. We filed for a restraining order. And suddenly, the legal tone of the situation changed. A few weeks later, we received a letter from his lawyer. It said he would avoid all contact with my family for 2 years. No communication, no harassment, nothing. We agreed to drop the case. And just like that, everything stopped. The garbage cans stayed upright, no more honking, no more middle fingers. Peace returned to the neighborhood. From the outside, it looked like the conflict was over. But inside my head, something still bothered me. For months, I had taken the high road, ignored the insults, ignored the harassment, ignored the attacks on my kid. And part of me wanted justice, not violence, not destruction, just payback. But I never acted on it until one day, in the most random place imaginable, a hardware store. I was walking through one of the garden aisles when I noticed a display. Japanese beetle traps. If you've never seen them before, they're basically plastics with a scent pack inside. The scent attracts Japanese beetles. They fly toward the smell, fall into the bag, and can't escape.
And then I remembered something. My neighbor's rose garden, his pride and joy, right in the front yard. Perfectly trimmed, perfectly watered, perfectly maintained. He spent hours working on those roses, and Japanese beetles absolutely love roses. The traps also sold refill scent packs, 4 per package. I stood there staring at them. Then something clicked in my brain. An idea. A terrible, brilliant, beautiful idea. I bought 4 packages, 16 scent packs. That night, I prepared the plan. The scent packs were made of a waxy material inside shallow plastic cups, so I stuck them in the freezer overnight. Freezing them would let me pop the wax blocks out easily. The next morning, I woke up at 3 a.m. The entire neighborhood was silent, streetlights glowing faintly, not a car in sight. I walked quietly into the kitchen, pulled the scent packs from the freezer, and popped the wax squares out of their cups. 16 little scent bombs. I dropped them into a baggie. Then I stepped outside. The air was cool, the world was quiet, and I walked slowly down the street, towards his house. His rose garden sat in the front yard like always, neatly arranged, fresh mulch, perfect rows of roses. I knelt down and began placing the wax blocks underneath the mulch, carefully, quietly, spreading them throughout the entire garden. Then I covered them with a thin layer of mulch so they were completely invisible. No traps, no bags, nothing visible, just scent, and scent alone. By the time I finished, it was almost 4 a.m. I walked home, got back into bed, and waited. That day turned out to be hot, really hot. By late morning, it was already over 90 degrees, which meant the wax had probably melted down into the dark mulch, releasing the scent into the air. Right around 11 a.m., I noticed the first few beetles, just a handful at first, flying around the roses. Later that evening, I went for a bike ride. When I passed his house, I had to stop. There were dozens of them, hovering, landing, eating. He hadn't noticed yet, but the swarm had begun. The next day, it got worse, much worse. By noon, there were hundreds, maybe thousands. The roses were covered, leaves twitching with movement. And that's when he finally noticed. I saw him outside in the yard, spraying chemicals, dumping 7 powder everywhere, swatting the air like a madman. The beetles didn't care. They just kept coming. By the 3rd day, it looked like a scene from a horror movie. Thousands upon thousands of beetles, covering the roses, covering the bushes, buzzing through the air. The scent packs must have attracted every Japanese beetle for miles. They absolutely devoured that garden. Petals disappeared, leaves shredded, flower buds eaten down to the stem. And my neighbor, he was losing his mind, spraying, cursing, running back and forth across the lawn. But it was hopeless. By the end of the 4th day, the garden was gone, completely gone. All that remained were thorny stalks and shredded leaves. Months of work, destroyed in less than a week, and I never said a word. Not to him, not to anyone, not even my wife. I just quietly watched from my porch, trying not to laugh. And the best part? He never figured it out. To this day, he probably believes it was just an unlucky infestation.
A natural disaster. A random plague of beetles. And honestly, that makes it even sweeter. Watching him fight those beetles was surreal, like watching someone try to hold back the ocean with a bucket. The harder he fought, the worse it got, because the scent was already soaked into the mulch, calling more and more beetles every hour. By the time the roses were completely destroyed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not anger, not hatred, just quiet satisfaction. Justice served. Without confrontation, without violence, without consequences. This happened years ago, and eventually the garden recovered. The roses grew back, and my neighbor, he stayed quiet. No more harassment, no more petty nonsense, just silence. And as long as he keeps being a peaceful neighbor, his roses will stay perfectly safe. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more insane revenge stories straight from Reddit. And tell me in the comments, what's the most creative revenge you've ever heard of? Trust me, some of the best ones might end up in the next video. And I'll see you in the next story.